I never thought the end of the world would smell like stale beer, wet concrete, and burnt garbage. But that was the scent drifting through the air the night everything changed, the night I stopped being just another invisible homeless man living under the I-84 overpass and became something else entirely. A survivor. Whether I wanted to be one or not. My name is Daniel Boone Carter. People used to call me Boone, mostly because it was easier to say than trying to pronounce my whole name through a mouthful of cheap whiskey. I had been living on the streets of Portland for almost 6 years, long enough that the rumble of traffic above me had become the closest thing I had to a lullaby. My shelter under the bridge was not much, just a torn blue tarp stretched between 2 concrete pillars and weighed down with rocks. Rain still managed to sneak in through the edges, dripping onto my sleeping bag and soaking my socks, but it was home. That night I sat near a metal barrel filled with burning scraps of wood, warming my hands as a cold wind whipped through the underpass. The barrel fire cracked and popped, casting orange light across the concrete like flickering ghosts. A couple of the regulars were there, but they were already half passed out, mumbling nonsense as they drifted into some kind of alcohol-induced sleep. I usually stayed awake later than most of them. Safer that way. People think homeless life is just hunger and cold, but danger is the worst part. People steal. People do worse. You learn to sleep with one eye open or you do not wake up at all. I should have noticed something was wrong earlier. The city sounded different. Too quiet. The usual noise of late-night traffic was gone. Even the distant hum of sirens, which normally blended into the background, was missing. Just silence and a faint breeze pushing garbage wrappers along the ground. Around midnight, I finally lay down in my sleeping bag, pulling the hood of my coat over my ears. I must have slept for 30 minutes before I woke to the sound of someone screaming. Not just a frightened scream. It was the kind of scream that tears itself out of a human throat when something is very, very wrong. I jolted upright so fast I hit my head on the concrete. The scream echoed again, louder, bouncing off the underpass like it had nowhere else to go. I pushed aside my tarp and crawled out into the open, the cold air instantly biting my face. At first, I thought it was just another fight. They happened often enough. But then I saw a shape stumbling across the empty street, arms flailing, blood splattering behind them in a dark trail. Another figure lunged after them, faster than any drunk or drugged person I had ever seen. The attacker slammed into the screaming man and dragged him to the ground. I froze. They were 20 yards away under a broken street lamp, and the pale yellow glow made everything look unreal, like a nightmare playing out in slow motion. I saw teeth tearing into flesh. I saw the victim kicking wildly, trying to push the attacker off. Then a wet ripping sound followed by a spray of blood that reached the middle of the road. The screaming stopped. I stumbled backward, my hand hitting the side of the bridge pillar. I could not breathe. I had seen stabbings, beatings, overdoses, and fights that ended badly, but I had never seen anything like this. The attacker lifted its head and I saw its face. Or what used to be its face. The skin was grayish, peeling like old wallpaper. Its mouth hung open wider than a normal jaw should allow, teeth cracked and stained with dark blood. The eyes were the worst. Empty. Clouded over. Dead. Yet the thing moved. The man beneath it was still twitching, weakly reaching up as if begging for help. The creature bit into him again, shaking its head like a dog tearing into meat. My stomach lurched. I backed toward my tarp shelter, trying not to make a sound. But my boot scraped against a crushed soda can. The metallic screech of it echoed across the underpass. The creature stopped eating. It slowly lifted its head, blood dripping from its mouth, and turned toward me with a stiff, unnatural motion. Those cloudy eyes locked onto me. There was no thinking in them, no hesitation. Just hunger. It stood. Bones cracked loudly as it straightened, like its body was forcing itself to move. Then it let out a low growl deep in its throat. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned and ran. My shelter was useless, so I sprinted past it, heading toward the chain-link fence that bordered the edge of the underpass. Behind me, I heard the creature scream. It was a horrible sound, something between a human shriek and an animal roar. It pushed me to run faster despite the cold cutting into my lungs. When I reached the fence, I grabbed the top and climbed. The metal groaned under my weight. My fingers slipped on the wet surface, but adrenaline forced me upward. As I pulled myself over the top, I glanced behind me. The creature was already halfway across the concrete, moving erratically but fast, too fast for something that looked so broken. My boot caught on a loose bit of wire. I fell over the fence, landing hard on my shoulder. Pain shot down my arm, but I forced myself up and ran into a nearby alley. Behind me, the creature slammed into the fence with a loud rattle, clawing at it with bleeding fingers, trying to climb. I kept running, weaving through trash piles and broken pallets until I reached the back of an abandoned loading dock. My chest burned, my legs trembled, and my breath fogged in the air with every gasp. I ducked behind a stack of wooden crates and crouched there, hugging myself as I listened. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard the fence rattle again, then metal tearing, then the creature screeching angrily. It was coming. I pressed my hands to my mouth to stop my breathing from sounding too loud. I could hear footsteps now, heavy and fast, hitting the pavement in an uneven rhythm. The sound grew louder. Closer. It echoed through the alley like something was sniffing out every corner, hunting. Then the footsteps stopped. I peeked around the side of the crates. The creature stood at the mouth of the alley. It turned its head slowly from side to side, as if searching. Its chest rose and fell in sharp, jerky movements, breath wheezing loudly through its torn throat. I stayed absolutely still. Even blinking felt dangerous. After a long, tense moment, it let out a guttural growl and shuffled away, heading back toward the street. I stayed hidden for a full 30 minutes before I dared to move. When I finally crawled out, the city still felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Lights flickered in distant buildings. A faint siren wailed far away, then cut off suddenly. Something big was happening. Something bad. And I was alone in it. A homeless man with nothing but a torn coat, an empty stomach, and a world falling apart around him. And the night had only just begun. I moved through the alley like a shadow, forcing myself to stay low and quiet, every sense stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. The moon hung behind a veil of thin clouds, giving the world a washed-out, ghostly look. Every reflective surface shimmered faintly. Every sound seemed louder than it should be. Even the crunch of broken glass under my boot felt like an explosion in the stillness. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see that creature's pale face turning the corner, its dead eyes locked onto me again. But the alley remained empty, just rows of dumpsters, broken crates, and torn-up cardboard that got blown there by the wind. It was the same alley I had walked through 1,000 times while searching for tossed-out food or a dry corner to sleep in when the shelter under the bridge flooded. But tonight it felt like I had stepped into a different world, a wrong version of it. As I reached the end of the alley, I saw the street ahead. Normally it would be filled with late-night traffic from bars and clubs. Loud music spilling out from cracked doors. People arguing or laughing or stumbling home half-drunk. But now it was silent. Completely. No cars. No pedestrians. Just trash blowing across the asphalt and a couple of flickering streetlights. I edged toward the corner and peeked out. That is when I saw the first police car. It had crashed into a lamppost, its hood crumpled like a crushed beer can. The windshield was shattered, spiderweb cracks across the entire surface. The flashing lights were still on but dim and slowing down, like the battery was dying. There was no officer inside. I looked up the street and saw another police car, doors left open, sirens dead silent. Then another. And an ambulance with its back doors hanging wide open. A gurney lay on its side beside it, straps dangling off. My stomach twisted. Something bad had swept through this place fast. I stepped out from the alley and walked slowly toward the ambulance, my breath fogging in front of me. The city air felt thick and sour, like something rotten had been stirred up. I kept my ears sharp, listening for anything. A footstep. A groan. Anything. The silence felt heavy enough to crush me. When I reached the ambulance, I crouched beside the overturned gurney. There was blood on it. A lot of blood. Dark and already drying, smeared along the metal rails. I pressed 2 fingers into the stain and felt the cold stickiness of it. Not old. Maybe an hour, maybe less. I scanned the area again, my heart thudding. A door somewhere slammed in the wind, making me flinch. I grabbed a broken piece of metal pipe from the ground and held it tight in my right hand. I had no weapon training, but in a world where monsters bit chunks out of people, even a rusty pipe was better than nothing. I kept walking, following the trail of wrecked emergency vehicles. It was like they had all responded to some massive incident at once, then collided or got ambushed before they could get anywhere. The deeper I went into the city, the more obvious it became that people had run, fought, or died in panic. I reached a bus stop with shattered glass all over the sidewalk. A backpack lay abandoned beside it, straps torn. A shoe sat in the gutter, flipped upside down. Not a pair. Just one. The kind of thing a person loses when they are dragged. I swallowed hard and kept moving. A few blocks ahead, I saw a grocery store. The front doors were smashed open, the motion sensors sparking but still trying uselessly to slide. Inside, the emergency lights flickered on and off. It was a risk, but I needed water, food, anything. I had eaten stale bread earlier that evening and nothing more. If this nightmare stretched into the morning, hunger was going to make me slow and stupid. So I forced myself forward. As I approached the entrance, I stopped abruptly. The smell hit me first. A heavy, metallic stench, like rusted metal mixed with rot. My nostrils flared and my stomach rolled. I had smelled death before. You do not survive on the streets without walking past the occasional overdose or frozen body, but this was stronger, fresher, like it hung thick in the air. I stepped inside the store, gripping the metal pipe tight. Shelves were knocked sideways, cereal boxes crushed underfoot, carts overturned. Something had torn through the place violently. Fresh grocery items lay scattered everywhere, trampled or smashed. But what made me stop dead were the footprints. Bloody footprints. Bare feet. Dozens of them, crisscrossing through the aisle, smeared into chaotic patterns. Some were big. Some were smaller. The edges of them looked messy, as if the skin on the feet that made them had been falling apart. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard a sound. A wet, dragging shuffle from deeper inside the store. I crouched instinctively, lowering myself behind a fallen shelf. The sound continued. Slow steps. Then a soft groan, long and low, like air escaping a broken balloon. I swallowed, pressing my back against the metal. I reminded myself I had nothing to lose. I had survived worse things than most people could imagine long before zombies existed. I had slept on freezing nights under cardboard, eaten out of dumpsters, fought other homeless men for a dry spot, and gone days without food. If anyone in this city was used to being invisible, used to danger, used to surviving with nothing, it was me. I crawled forward slowly and peeked around the next aisle. A shape hunched near the refrigerated section. It moved in slow jerks, like each motion hurt. Its head twitched as it turned. Even from the back, I could see pieces of skin hanging off its neck. Hair matted with dried blood. Shoulders rising and falling in irregular spasms. Then it turned. Its face was worse than the one I saw under the bridge. Half the cheek was torn away, exposing teeth beneath the skin. The lips were split apart. One eye bulged out at a strange angle. It sniffed the air suddenly, its nostrils twitching. It sensed me. Slowly, its head lifted. I ducked back behind the shelf just as it let out a guttural snarl. Then its footsteps quickened. I backed away, hands trembling, trying not to trip over debris. If I ran outright, it would hear me. If I stayed still, it would find me. My mind raced. Then I saw an opening. A path between two aisles that led to the back stockroom. I moved as fast as I could without making noise. The creature picked up speed. Its snarling grew louder. It was following my scent, my footsteps, my breathing. I did not know what made these things hunt, but they hunted like predators. I slipped into the stockroom and hid behind a stack of crates. The metal door behind me hung crooked on its hinge, leaving a small gap that led to a neighboring alley. An escape path, if I needed it. The creature's footsteps entered the stockroom. Slow. Sniffing. Searching. I covered my mouth with my sleeve to muffle my breathing. Sweat rolled down my forehead even though the room was cold. The creature dragged one foot, making a wet scraping sound with each step. It stopped just a few feet from the crates. I closed my eyes. Then something clattered outside, maybe a dumpster lid blown by the wind, and the creature snapped its head toward the sound. It let out a broken howl and limped toward the back exit, squeezing through the crooked door frame. The moment it left, I bolted. I sprinted through the gap and into the open alley, not stopping until I reached the far sidewalk. My lungs screamed for air. My legs trembled. I leaned against a wall, swallowing hard as the adrenaline slowly faded. But the city wasn't silent anymore. As I listened, I heard distant screams. Multiple. Some far, some closer. A car alarm blared uselessly somewhere. Glass broke. Something roared. Something answered. This wasn't just a random attack. The whole city was falling. And I was alone. A homeless man with no one looking for him and nothing to return to. The only advantage I had was that I already knew how to survive when the world didn't care if I lived or died. But now the world wasn't indifferent. It was hungry. By the time I put 3 blocks between myself and that grocery store, the night had changed. The silence was gone, replaced by distant chaos spreading through the city like wildfire. Helicopters thudded somewhere far above the clouds, their searchlights cutting erratic beams across skyscrapers. Sirens wailed in no clear direction, stopping and starting as if the people inside the vehicles were fighting for their lives while trying to operate them. Screams rose from different corners of the city, blending together into a chorus of panic. I could not tell if they belonged to the living or the dead. The cold wind cut through my jacket as I ran, bending around corners and slipping between buildings. Trash blew across the empty roads like drifting tumbleweeds. I kept glancing behind me, expecting that gray-skinned monster from the grocery store to come stumbling after me. But for the moment, all I had for company were the echoing sounds of catastrophe unfolding. I stopped beneath the overhang of a closed pawn shop, catching my breath. My throat burned. My chest ached. My hands shook from the cold and adrenaline. I had been living out here long enough to know one hard truth. No one was coming to save me. When disasters hit, the homeless are always forgotten first. I needed shelter, somewhere defensible, somewhere the dead would have trouble reaching. Under a bridge had been enough to survive the cold. But not monsters. Not things that tore open steel mesh fences like paper. I scanned the street and spotted a place I knew well. The old public library. A 3-story brick building with thick glass windows and a heavy oak front door. Most nights it served as a quiet haven where I'd warm myself near the back vents, stealing a little heat from the building's old boilers. If the power was still on, the doors might be locked. But I had broken into enough abandoned places to know that locks were just suggestions if you were desperate enough. I moved quickly, keeping the metal pipe tight in my hand. The streets were still mostly empty, but the noise was growing. Something crashed far away. Something else growled, followed by a shrill scream that cut off suddenly. I felt my heartbeat spike. As I reached the library steps, I heard a tapping sound behind me. Soft. Repetitive. Like fingernails on concrete. I spun around. A figure stood halfway down the block. At first I thought it was just some poor drunk who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. It swayed back and forth under a streetlight, arms limp at its sides. But then it started walking toward me in that broken, twitchy way I was beginning to recognize too well. Its mouth hung open. Its clothes were drenched in blood. Half its scalp was missing, exposing part of its skull. It let out a faint, gurgling moan. Then it broke into a lurching run. I dashed up the library steps and grabbed the heavy brass handle. Locked. The creature shrieked behind me, closing the distance fast. I scanned the steps, desperate. If I smashed the window, the noise would draw more of them. But I didn't have a choice. Survival is about doing the thing you don't want to do. I slammed the metal pipe into the glass pane beside the door. The first hit cracked the surface. The second shattered it into jagged pieces. Cold air blew out from inside the building. The creature reached the bottom of the stairs. I shoved my arm through the broken window, ignoring the slice it made across my sleeve. I reached inside for the bolt, fingers scraping against the metal. The creature's footsteps hammered against the stone steps. I found the lock and twisted hard. The click echoed like salvation. I yanked the door open, dove inside, and slammed it behind me just as the creature hit it with full force. The impact shook the entire frame. The creature screamed and threw its weight against the wood, pounding it with its fists so hard that pieces of splintered veneer rained onto the floor. I stumbled backward, breathing hard, staring at the door as it shuddered under every hit. Minutes passed. The pounding grew frantic, louder, then suddenly stopped. I didn't move. I waited. Then a faint dragging sound scraped along the building's exterior, fading into the distance. Only then did I let myself collapse into one of the library's old wooden chairs. The silence inside the building felt unreal. Bookshelves lined the tall walls like silent witnesses. Dust danced in thin beams of moonlight cutting through the broken glass. The smell of old paper and varnished wood wrapped around me like a blanket. But the safety was an illusion. I knew it. Any place without food was only temporary. And the dead were fast learners. If one had found me, more could. I pushed myself back to my feet and began searching the library. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Every sound made my nerves jump. The main hall was empty. The reading tables were just as I remembered them, polished wood, chairs neatly tucked in. A coffee cup sat forgotten on the checkout counter. A jacket hung on the back of a stool. Whoever had been working here last must have left in a hurry. I slipped behind the counter and rummaged through the drawers. Nothing useful. Pens, sticky notes, overdue notices. Then I found something. A ring of keys. I held them up, listening to them clink softly. If they belonged to the building, I might be able to lock every door, maybe find a secure room inside. I moved through the library systematically, checking each room. The computer lab was empty, chairs overturned. The children's section was dark and eerie, small toy blocks scattered across the carpet like the ghosts of past story times. The basement door was locked, and when I opened it with the keys, I found rows of archival shelves but no power. I didn't dare go far into the darkness. The second floor was quiet too. A few more signs of people leaving in a rush. A half-eaten sandwich on a desk. A purse dumped over. Someone must have been fleeing when the outbreak hit. On the third floor, I found something unexpected. A small maintenance room with metal shelves, a tool bench, and a window overlooking the street. But what caught my eye was a stack of supplies. Bottled water. Cleaning chemicals. A half box of protein bars. Maybe staff used it during long shifts. Maybe someone had been storing emergency items. Didn't matter. It was enough to get me through a day or two. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, drinking the first bottle of clean water I had tasted in days. The cold liquid hit my empty stomach so hard I felt dizzy. I ate half a protein bar, forcing myself to save the rest even though hunger twisted in my gut like a coiled snake. Then the city reminded me why resting was dangerous. A loud explosion rocked the night, shaking the window so hard I thought it would break. I scrambled to my feet and saw fire rising a few blocks away. Cars were overturned in the streets. Something huge was moving through the smoke, stumbling between parked vehicles. I couldn't see clearly, but whatever it wasn't human-sized. Sirens wailed again, this time closer. Then a scream tore through the air. Not human. And not alone. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. This was only the first night. Cities didn't fall this fast. Not unless the outbreak was already everywhere. I realized something terrifying in that moment. Being homeless wasn't my weakness. It was my training. I already knew how to survive without help, how to vanish, how to think like a man with nothing but his own instincts. Maybe that was why I was still alive while others weren't. But I also knew something else, something I had learned the hard way over years of living invisible to society. The first safe place is never safe for long. And this library had already served its purpose. I would have to move again, soon. Because the dead were evolving. And the living were dying faster than I could find shelter. I stayed awake all night in that library, crouched on the maintenance room floor, listening to the city breathe in short, violent gasps. The faint scratching of debris outside the broken windows made my stomach twist in knots. Every shadow seemed to move, every gust of wind sounded like dragging feet, every distant scream promised death closer than I dared imagine. I had survived on the streets for years, but nothing had prepared me for this. Not hunger, not cold, not the fights for a dry corner or a stolen blanket. Nothing prepared you for the dead walking again. By the first light of dawn, the storm of chaos seemed to have paused. The streets below were littered with abandoned cars, trash, overturned dumpsters. Smoke rose from some fires that were too small to illuminate the whole city, too scattered to signal rescue. I grabbed my pipe and slowly crept toward the third-floor window, peering down at the street. Nothing moved at first. Then a figure shuffled out from behind a burned-out car. Gray, twisted, its clothes soaked in blood. The way it walked was not natural, it jerked and dragged a leg, fingers scraping the asphalt. I counted 3 more moving figures in the distance, limping between the wreckage. And then I heard them, the moans. Low, guttural, hungry. The sound made my blood run cold. I knew I couldn't stay. The library had been a temporary refuge, but no building is safe when the dead are around. I would need a new plan, and fast. The question was where to go. The city was a maze of danger now. The streets below were too open, too easy to be spotted. The alleys might conceal me, but there was no way to know if more of those creatures lurked there. I had survived years in Portland by knowing its streets, by knowing which corners offered cover, which dumpsters had dry cardboard, which abandoned cars could hide me from trouble. That knowledge might be the only thing keeping me alive now. I began my descent cautiously, climbing down the fire escape on the side of the building. My legs trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline. Every clink of metal under my boots, every squeak of rusted hinges made me flinch. When I finally reached the alley at the back, I crouched low and moved forward, scanning constantly for movement. The streets were worse than I had imagined. The remnants of humanity were everywhere. A man crawling, dragging himself across the asphalt with his arms, missing half his face. A woman slumped over in a doorway, arms twitching unnaturally. A child's doll lay face down in a puddle of water and blood. The smell was unbearable. The taste of bile rose in my throat. I turned into a narrower alley, hoping to lose myself in shadows. That was when I heard it, footsteps, but faster than the slow shuffling of the dead. A human. I froze. The sound came closer, deliberate and careful. Whoever it was moved with purpose, but I didn't know if they were friend or foe. In this world, that distinction could be the difference between survival and death. "Hey," I whispered cautiously, raising my pipe. No answer. The figure stepped into the dim light, a man, mid-30s, wearing a torn hoodie and a backpack. His eyes were wide, wild, scanning every corner. He stopped when he saw me. "Don't move," I said, voice hoarse. "I'm not one of them." He lowered his makeshift weapon, a baseball bat with nails sticking out. You're human?" he asked, disbelief in his tone. I nodded. "Yeah. You." He let out a short laugh, a mixture of relief and hysteria. Yeah. Thought I was alone." He swallowed hard. "Name's Rick." I nodded in acknowledgement. "Daniel. Boone. Been surviving these streets for a while. You?" Rick gave me a sideways glance. "Lucky, I guess. Just found a few places. Got supplies. Trying to stay alive." His voice shook. "This city. He swallowed again. "It's gone." I knew exactly what he meant. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. The streets I had walked for years, the places I had relied on, the alleys and abandoned corners I knew like the back of my hand, they had been consumed. The chaos had devoured the city overnight. "Library," I said, pointing behind me. "It's safe. For now. Supplies. Water. Maybe a day or two worth. You can come with me." Rick hesitated. "Safe? You mean for real?" I gave a short laugh, grim and bitter. "Nothing's safe. Not anymore. But the library's walls are thick. I can lock doors. Can keep things out for a while." He nodded quickly, following me as I led him down the alley toward the side entrance. Every shadow made me flinch. Every distant sound made my muscles tighten. Inside the library, Rick and I locked ourselves in a small back room. I handed him a bottle of water, and we sat on the floor, backs against the wall, listening. He looked around, taking in the broken windows, the overturned shelves, the scattered books. This is crazy," he said softly. "How did this happen?" I shrugged. "No one knows. Virus, infection. Something. People started acting wrong. Not human anymore. Saw it for myself last night. Been running ever since." Rick's hands trembled as he held the bottle. I can't believe this is real." "It is," I said. "And it's going to get worse. The first night is nothing compared to what comes next. You want to survive. You need to move fast, think fast, and don't trust anyone. Not even the people you meet. Not yet." We sat in silence after that, broken only by the distant groans and crashes. I watched Rick carefully. He was clearly terrified, but he was still alive, still breathing. That's what counted. For now. By midday, I decided we needed to move. The library would not hold forever. Rick followed closely as I led him through the back alleys, avoiding main streets and open areas. The city felt like a maze of danger. Every corner could hide death. Every shadow could conceal someone, or something, that wanted to kill. We came across an abandoned convenience store. Its glass doors were smashed, but the shelves still held cans of food and bottled water. I motioned for Rick to stay low while I checked inside. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. I grabbed a few supplies, enough to fill my small backpack. Rick followed, taking what he could carry. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the next block. I froze. Rick froze. The sound of dragging, shuffling, snarling. We exchanged a look. "They're close," I whispered. Rick's eyes widened. We need to run." I nodded. "Yes. Now." We bolted from the store, running down the alleyway, hearts pounding, lungs burning. Behind us, I could hear them, the groans, the scraping, the relentless pursuit. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. All that mattered was forward, moving, surviving. Somehow, we made it a few blocks ahead, ducking into the ruins of an old apartment building. Broken stairs, collapsed walls, debris everywhere. But it gave us cover. I motioned for Rick to stay low as we found a small room on the second floor with a partially intact door. We barricaded it with old furniture, dragging a dresser and a broken table against the frame. Then we sat on the floor, backs against the wall, listening to the city outside. The groans faded slowly as the day went on, replaced by the distant sound of collapsing buildings and the occasional scream. The city was dying, but we were alive, at least for now. Rick looked at me, pale and shaken. What? What now?" I didn't answer immediately. Survival is never about hope. Survival is about strategy, about moving, about staying alive 1 hour at a time. "We keep moving," I said finally. "We find food, we find water, we find a better place. And we stay quiet. That's all we can do." Rick nodded, swallowing hard. I could see the fear in his eyes, but also determination. The first day had broken most people. But we were still standing. And in this city of shadows, that was the only thing that mattered. We stayed in that abandoned apartment for most of the day, hiding behind the barricade, listening to the city decay around us. The sun rose higher, though it barely lit the streets. Smoke hung thick in the air, twisting like a living thing. Every block we could see from the broken windows told the same story: cars overturned, fires burning, bodies strewn across asphalt. The few people still alive were either running in blind panic or crouched, frozen in fear. And the creatures, the things that had taken over, were everywhere. Rick and I had eaten what little we had from the convenience store, a few cans of beans and some protein bars. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep our energy up for the short term. I had been living rough for years, scavenging and surviving in the streets. That experience gave me an edge. Hunger, cold, fear, these were old friends. Rick, on the other hand, was clearly out of his depth. His eyes darted constantly, his hands shaking as he clutched the pipe I had lent him for protection. We knew we couldn't stay in one place. The library was gone. The apartment building was temporary. The city outside was turning into a hunting ground. Supplies were scarce, and the undead would soon figure out any hiding spots we found. By late afternoon, I decided it was time to move. I whispered our plan to Rick. "We cross through the old market district," I said, pointing to a cracked map I had found in my backpack. "Lots of back alleys, abandoned shops. Fewer wide streets. We'll stay out of sight." Rick swallowed hard. "You think it's safe?" "No," I said bluntly. "Nothing is safe. But it's the best shot we have." We waited for shadows to stretch long across the city, using the dim light to conceal ourselves. Rick followed closely behind me as I led him through a series of crumbling buildings, ducking behind walls and debris, moving quietly. The closer we got to the market district, the more obvious it became that chaos had swept through here first. Stalls lay overturned, metal shutters ripped from their frames. Fruits and vegetables rotted in the streets. A pile of crates spilled across the asphalt, some smashed, some drenched in blood. Then I saw it, movement at the far end of the street. A group of the dead, 5 or 6, stumbling toward the center of the market. Their heads twisted unnaturally as they dragged broken limbs behind them. Their groans echoed against the buildings, low and hungry. Rick froze. "We can't go past them," he whispered. "Yes, we can," I said, gripping my pipe tighter. "But we move slow, stay in the shadows, and keep low." We crept along the side of a collapsed shop, using piles of rubble as cover. My boot slipped in the debris, sending a small rock clattering across the pavement. I held my breath, waiting. The group ahead didn't react. Their attention seemed focused elsewhere, on a person I couldn't see. But that was enough. We edged closer, inch by inch, moving as silently as possible. The smell of decay was overwhelming. Rick gagged once, but I pressed a hand over his mouth before he could make a sound. One of the creatures stumbled into an open puddle, its foot splashing water. My heart jumped. The sound of it echoed across the street. But the undead didn't flinch. They barely noticed. We finally made it past them, pressing against the side wall of a collapsed building. Rick let out a shaky breath once we were out of sight. "I thought we were done for," he whispered. "Don't relax," I said. "Not yet." The market district was worse than I had expected. Bodies lay everywhere. Shops had been looted and ransacked. Fires burned unattended. Smoke and ash filled the air. We moved quickly from alley to alley, avoiding open streets as much as possible. Every shadow could hide death. Every sound could draw attention. By nightfall, we reached a partially intact grocery store at the edge of the district. The doors were jammed, but we forced them open carefully. Inside, the shelves were mostly empty, but there were a few cans, bottled water, and other supplies we could scavenge. I handed some to Rick, who barely looked up as he shoved food into his backpack. Suddenly, a sound froze me mid-step. A soft scraping, coming from the far end of the store. I motioned for Rick to stay down, then crept forward, pipe ready. A figure emerged from behind a shelf. Not a creature. Not fully. A man. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He raised his hands slowly. "Don't shoot," he whispered. "I'm human." I studied him carefully. He seemed exhausted, desperate. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and a baseball bat in his hand. "Name's Marcus," he said. "I've been hiding in the city since. Well, since it started. You too." "Boone," I said, glancing at Rick. "And this is Rick. We're trying to survive." Marcus nodded. "Yeah. Me too. Haven't seen anyone in days. Thought I was the last one." I didn't fully trust him, but in this world, having an ally, even a cautious one, was better than nothing. "You want to stick with us for now?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah. For now." We shared the supplies we had scavenged, eating quickly. Then I laid out the plan for the night. We would stay in the store for a few hours, hidden in the back room, until dawn. Then we would move toward the river district, where abandoned warehouses might give better shelter and more supplies. As we huddled together, listening to the groans outside, I thought about how the city had changed overnight. The streets I had walked for years, the places I had hidden and survived in, were gone. Humanity was collapsing, and the dead were filling every corner. I realized something that made my stomach twist. Being invisible had kept me alive all these years, surviving the streets as a homeless man. But now, being invisible was no longer enough. Invisibility didn't matter when the dead could smell you, see you, hunt you. Survival required more strategy, speed, and constant vigilance. Rick and Marcus fell asleep after a while, exhausted. I stayed awake, pipe in hand, listening to every sound outside. Every groan, every shuffle, every crash of debris made me flinch. I thought about the city beyond these walls. About the people who had turned. About the ones still running, screaming, trying to survive. And I thought about tomorrow. Tomorrow we would have to move again. Because in this world, the dead did not sleep. And neither could we. We left the convenience store before dawn, moving cautiously through streets that had been ripped apart by chaos. The night had given the city an eerie stillness, but we knew the calm was temporary. Boone, me, Rick, and Marcus, three scared men moving through a city that had turned into a hunting ground. Each step had to be measured, each shadow scanned. Every noise could mean death. The river district was about 2 miles from the market. I had been there a few times in my old life, scavenging the warehouses and docks for anything useful. The docks offered wide open areas, but the warehouses were mostly intact, with thick walls and minimal entry points, perfect for a temporary safe zone. The problem was getting there without attracting attention. We moved through narrow alleys, hugging the walls of crumbling buildings. The smell of burning plastic and rot hung thick in the air. Occasionally, we heard distant screaming or the hollow groans of the dead echoing down a street. I kept my pipe ready, my senses straining. Rick's hands were white around his makeshift weapon, and Marcus kept looking over his shoulder, muttering under his breath. "Quiet," I hissed. "Move slow." A few blocks in, we ran into our first obstacle. A car had crashed sideways across the street, blocking our path. Behind it, a small group of the dead shuffled, dragging torn limbs. Their heads twisted unnaturally, their faces grotesque and partially decomposed. One of them let out a guttural scream, startling Rick so badly he almost lost his balance. "Stay calm," I whispered, pressing my hand against his shoulder. "We're not alone in this. But we can get past." I led us along the sides of the buildings, moving through a narrow alley that ran parallel to the main street. The creatures did not notice us. Their senses were focused somewhere else, probably a stray human they had caught sight of earlier. Still, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Once we cleared the street, we moved faster, ducking into a derelict warehouse that I knew had an access point to the docks. The building smelled of mildew, rust, and decay. Broken pallets and crates were scattered across the floor. We crept through it, checking every shadow. It was quiet for a few tense minutes, until we heard a sound, metal scraping against metal. I froze. Rick and Marcus froze. A faint echo bounced across the warehouse, growing louder. Something, or someone, was inside with us. I motioned for them to stay low. Slowly, I crept toward the source of the noise. Behind a stack of crates, I found a small group of creatures. One had its head stuck between two metal beams, struggling and moaning. The others were circling it, like predators waiting for their prey. I counted 3 more, all twitching and jerking in their unnatural way. I gritted my teeth. We couldn't fight them. Not here. Not with just pipes and bats. If we made a noise, we'd attract more. I backed away slowly, leading Rick and Marcus to a side door that opened onto the docks. The fresh air hit us like a wave. For a moment, I felt relief. The docks were quiet, with only the faint sound of water lapping against the piers. We moved along the edge of the water, keeping to the shadows. Abandoned cargo containers offered cover, and the occasional crane or warehouse provided hiding spots if needed. "This way," I said, pointing toward a large warehouse at the end of the pier. "It's mostly intact, and the doors can be barricaded. Could be our first real safe place." We approached carefully. The wooden doors were weathered but sturdy. I checked the surroundings before pushing one open just enough to slip inside. The warehouse smelled of salt, oil, and rot. Crates and barrels were stacked neatly along the walls, offering places to hide. There was a small office area in one corner, with a desk and a few lockers. Perfect for storing supplies and keeping watch. Once inside, we barricaded the door with pallets and crates. The sound of our breathing filled the empty space. I set my pipe down, exhausted, and sank onto an overturned crate. Rick leaned against the wall, pale and shaking. Marcus paced the floor, muttering to himself. "We can rest here for a bit," I said. "We need to eat, drink, and plan our next move." But we stay quiet. One mistake and we're done. We scavenged what we could from the warehouse. A few cans of food were hidden among crates. Some bottled water. I even found a small first aid kit, mostly empty, but better than nothing. We ate in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Rick finally spoke, voice trembling. "Boone. How did this happen so fast? The city. Everyone. Gone. I don't understand." I looked at him. No one understands. That's the problem. It's not like a storm or fire. This is something else. The rules changed overnight. People we saw yesterday, gone, turned dead. There's no warning, no reason. You survive by keeping your head down, staying mobile, and watching everything. Marcus nodded grimly. "I've seen it too. People attacking others. Not like themselves. Like something else took over. I don't know how to explain it." "You think it's the end?" I shook my head. "I don't know if anything is the end. But I do know this: if we stay alive tonight, tomorrow we plan again. We keep moving, keep scavenging, keep watching each other. That's the only chance we have." The night dragged on slowly. Every sound outside the warehouse made me tense. The groans of the dead, the distant screams, the crash of falling debris. I sat awake while Rick and Marcus slept in shifts, trying to keep some sense of vigilance. By morning, the docks were even more silent than before. Too silent. I knew better than to trust the calm. Somewhere out there, the creatures were regrouping, hunting, learning. The city itself had become a monster, a living threat that stretched for miles in every direction. "We move before dawn," I said, waking the others. "River District is just the start. Supplies are limited. The warehouse is temporary. We need a better place, somewhere defensible, with food and water. But we don't stay here long." Rick nodded, swallowing hard. Marcus adjusted his backpack and tightened his grip on his bat. We moved cautiously, sticking to shadows, scanning every alley and street. The city had become a maze of danger, every corner potentially deadly, every building a potential tomb. I realized, as we stepped back into the streets, that surviving as a homeless man had given me skills most people didn't have. The instincts I had honed over years, watching, listening, hiding, moving without being seen, were now keeping us alive in a city overrun with death. But even my experience would be tested to the limit in the days to come. Because the dead were evolving. And tomorrow, we would face them again. The River District had given us temporary shelter, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, the weight of the city's danger pressed down on us again. The streets were shadows and silence, but every shadow could hide death, every corner could be a trap. Boone had led us through this maze, his knowledge of abandoned alleys and broken buildings guiding us like a compass. Rick and I followed, exhausted, terrified, but aware that standing still meant certain death. We had managed to scavenge some supplies from the warehouses, canned food, bottled water, a few flashlights that still worked. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us moving for another day. Boone was the only one who seemed calm, his eyes scanning the streets constantly, every sense stretched taut. Rick and I were jittery, flinching at every sound. I could feel the city breathing, a living, rotting thing full of hunger. Our first obstacle came just after dark. We turned a corner and found a line of cars abandoned across the street. Their doors were open, windows shattered, and several had the smell of rot wafting from inside. As we crept closer, I noticed movement inside a dark sedan. I held my breath, waiting, watching. A pale arm flopped out of the open window. A moan followed, low and wet. Boone gestured for us to stay down. The creatures were slow, but persistent, driven by a hunger that never wavered. We moved along the edge of the street, using the cars as cover. One of the dead pulled itself out of the vehicle, dragging a leg behind it. Its head twisted unnaturally as it sniffed the air. I gripped my pipe tighter, ready to swing if it noticed us. It didn't. Somehow, we made it past, sticking close to the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands were slick with sweat, but we survived. For now. Boone led us to a back alley, narrower and darker than anything we had seen that day. Trash and debris littered the ground, broken signs leaning against walls. The smell of decay was thick here, stronger than anywhere else. As we crept along, I could hear distant moans growing louder, coming from multiple directions. The city was waking up, and the dead were on the move. We needed a safe place to spend the night. Boone had mentioned an old shipping container yard a few blocks away. The containers were stacked high, some forming makeshift towers. If we could climb one and block the lower containers, we might have a defensible position. It was risky, but at this point, risk was the only option. We moved quickly, scanning every corner as we went. The first sign of trouble came when Rick stumbled over a piece of broken metal. A loud clatter echoed through the alley. I froze, looking at Boone. He gestured for us to keep moving, not to draw attention. Somehow, the noise didn't attract any of the undead, but our nerves were frayed. Every sound felt like a signal that death was close. At the shipping yard, we found the containers just as Boone had described. Some were rusted, doors hanging off their hinges. Others were intact, stacked in towers of 3 or 4 containers high. We picked a corner where we could see the street, climb onto a container, and block the lower ones. Boone and I worked together to push a few crates in front of the bottom container door while Rick stayed watch. The groans outside grew louder. Somewhere in the distance, something slammed into a metal door, then moaned in frustration. The sound echoed, shaking the air around us. Once the barricade was secure, Boone motioned for us to climb. The containers were cold, metal biting at our hands as we pulled ourselves up. At the top, we had a clear view of the yard. The city stretched out beyond, broken and burning, a labyrinth of death. From this height, we could see movement, groups of the dead wandering, scavenging, hunting. We took turns keeping watch that night. Boone went first, scanning the streets below. Rick was pale, muttering under his breath. I took the middle shift, gripping my pipe, listening to every sound. The wind carried the stench of rot, the faint metallic tang of blood. Every few minutes, a creature would stumble past the yard, dragging a limb, sniffing the air, oblivious to our presence. Around midnight, we heard a crash closer than anything before. A group of the dead had found a nearby building and were tearing through it. The groans were deafening, echoing across the empty streets. Boone motioned for silence, and we watched as the creatures broke through the walls, spilling into the street. Rick's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the bat. Boone leaned close. "Don't panic," he whispered. "Stay low, stay quiet, and they'll pass. They're not fast. Yet." The creatures wandered the streets for what felt like hours. Some were drawn away by the sounds of breaking metal. Others stumbled into dead ends, trapped. Eventually, their groans faded into the distance, leaving an eerie silence. By the time dawn approached, we were exhausted. Boone suggested moving again, but we decided to stay until the sun was fully up. Visibility would give us an advantage, at least for a short while. We rationed the food we had left and drank sparingly. Boone kept his eyes on the street, silent and vigilant. Rick and I tried to rest, but sleep was impossible with the constant tension, the sounds of a city filled with death. As the sun rose, we could see more clearly the devastation around us. Cars abandoned mid-escape, fires smoldering, buildings crumbled and hollowed out. The river district had become a dead zone, full of danger and scarcity. Boone turned to us, face grim. "We need to move," he said. "Supplies here are limited, and this area is going to draw more of them." We head toward the northern warehouses. Bigger buildings, more room to defend, more chance of finding food. But the streets between here and there. It's going to be a nightmare. Rick swallowed hard, looking pale. Can we make it? Boone's eyes were hard. We don't have a choice. We survive because we move. Every step counts. Every moment counts. If we stop, we die. We packed our meager supplies, pushed off the container, and slipped down into the yard. The city waited for us outside, silent and watching, full of shadows that moved with hunger. Every step through the streets was calculated, measured. Every sound was a warning. As we reached the edge of the district, Boone motioned for us to stop. Ahead, a group of the dead was moving in our direction. A mix of fast and slow ones, limping, jerking, moaning. There was no way around them. The streets were too open. Boone scanned the area, searching for a plan. His eyes caught a narrow alley to the left. "We go through there," he whispered. "Stay close, move fast, and stay quiet. One mistake, and they're on us." We followed him, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. The alley was narrow, full of debris, but it offered cover. The creatures were behind us, closing the distance slowly. Every step had to be perfect. Rick tripped once, almost making a noise, but Boone grabbed his arm and yanked him back before anything happened. We moved like shadows, silent and deliberate. The creatures' groans grew louder, then faded as we navigated the twists and turns of the alley. Finally, we emerged on a side street closer to the northern warehouses. Our muscles ached, our lungs burned, but we had made it. For now. Boone turned to us, face grim but determined. "This city isn't going to get easier. It's going to get worse. But we're still alive. That's what matters. Stay sharp, stay quiet, and stay together. That's the only way we survive." We nodded, knowing the truth in his words. The hunt through the city was far from over. The dead were everywhere, and humanity was a memory. But as we moved toward the warehouses, I felt a spark of grim determination. We were alive. And as long as we were, we could fight. The northern warehouses loomed ahead like silent sentinels, tall and imposing against the gray morning sky. Boone had described them as a cluster of massive storage buildings along a half-abandoned freight line, some still in relatively good condition. To anyone else, they might have seemed like relics of the city's past commerce. To us, they were a potential lifeline, a place to hide, scavenge, and regroup. We approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows of abandoned cars and broken walls. Rick was pale, sweat dampening his shirt despite the cold morning air. Marcus muttered under his breath, clutching his bat, eyes flicking nervously at every corner. Boone led the way, scanning every street and alley for movement, every window for a lurking threat. The streets between the river district and the warehouses were worse than we'd expected. Abandoned cars blocked the main roads. The occasional corpse sprawled across the asphalt, partially eaten or decomposed. From some distance, we could hear groans echoing from the deeper city streets, the unmistakable sounds of the dead hunting. Boone gestured for us to take cover behind a burned-out delivery truck as we crept forward. "There's a small alley here," Boone whispered. "It'll take us behind the warehouses. Less chance of being seen." We slipped into the narrow alley, carefully stepping over broken glass and scraps of metal. The walls were covered with graffiti and grime, and the smell of rot was stronger here. Every step made me tense. Every sound could be the end. We moved like shadows, silent and deliberate. As we emerged from the alley, the northern warehouses spread before us. Some were massive brick structures, doors hanging on broken hinges. Others were metal-sided, rusted from years of neglect. The area was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the city we had left behind. Boone led us to a brick warehouse at the far end, the doors partially boarded but intact. "This one," he said. "It's defensible. Few windows, thick walls, and a second floor we can use to watch the streets." We approached cautiously, listening. Nothing moved outside. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every muscle taut with tension. Boone tested the door. It was locked, but with enough force, he managed to push it open just enough to slip inside. Rick and Marcus followed, and we quickly secured the entrance with crates, pallets, and metal scraps. Inside, the warehouse smelled of dust, old wood, and mildew. Broken pallets and crates littered the floor. A small office area in one corner had desks and filing cabinets, intact enough to be used for storage. Boone moved to the second floor, a set of metal stairs creaking under his weight. From up there, he could see the surrounding streets, the abandoned docks, and a portion of the city beyond. "This will work," Boone said finally. "We can stay here for a while. Safe enough to sleep, scavenge, and plan our next move." We spent the morning exploring the warehouse, gathering supplies from old crates and offices. There were a few cans of food, bottles of water, and even some blankets tucked away in a storage room. Not much, but enough to sustain us temporarily. Boone suggested setting up shifts to watch the surrounding streets. The dead were unpredictable, and any movement outside could attract them. Rick was still jittery, but he managed a small smile when we found a half-used first aid kit in a dusty corner. "Better than nothing," he muttered, tucking it into his backpack. Marcus, still clutching his bat, was silent for most of the morning, pacing the floor as he inspected the warehouse. Boone pulled him aside at one point. "You're not used to this," Boone said quietly. "But if you want to survive, you need to focus. Fear is normal, but panic will get you killed. Watch the streets, listen, and stay alert. That's all that matters." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll try," he said. By midday, we had cleared a small section of the warehouse to serve as our living space. Crates and pallets formed makeshift walls, separating our area from the rest of the building. Boone suggested we take turns sleeping in shifts, keeping someone awake at all times to watch the streets. The city was quiet for now, but that was deceptive. Silence in a city full of the dead was often the prelude to chaos. The first shift was mine. I sat near a small window overlooking the street, pipe in hand, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The wind carried the smell of decay from blocks away, and my ears strained to catch every sound. Occasionally, I thought I heard footsteps or groans, but they always seemed to be just out of reach. Boone had taught me to trust my instincts, and my instincts told me to stay alert. Hours passed slowly. The warehouse was mostly quiet, but every creak of metal, every shift of a crate made me flinch. Rick and Marcus slept in the corner, huddled under the blankets we had found. Boone sat in the office upstairs, watching the streets from the second floor. As night approached, Boone called us together. "We need to plan," he said. "Staying here is temporary. Supplies are limited, and the dead are going to find us eventually. We need to move further north, toward the industrial district. Bigger warehouses, more room to defend, better chance of finding food and water. But the streets in between. They're dangerous. Crowded with them. You'll see what I mean." Rick swallowed hard. Do we have to?" Boone's eyes were hard. "Yes. If we stay here too long, we die. Movement is survival. Standing still is death. You understand that?" We nodded. Boone outlined our plan. We would move at dawn, sticking to alleys and shadows, using abandoned buildings for cover. I would take the lead, using my knowledge of the streets to guide us. Marcus and Rick would follow, keeping quiet and alert. The industrial district was 2 miles away, and we had to cross streets crowded with the undead. Any misstep could mean death. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. We ate the remaining food sparingly, rationing water. Boone and I kept watch in shifts, eyes glued to the street. Rick and Marcus tried to sleep, but the fear was etched on their faces. Every groan outside, every distant crash of debris, made them flinch. When the first light of dawn touched the rooftops, Boone nudged us awake. "Time to move," he said quietly. "Stay low, stay quiet, and stay together. This is going to be rough." We packed our backpacks with what little supplies we had and checked our makeshift weapons. The pipe, the bat, and a few small knives. Not much, but enough to give us a fighting chance. Boone led the way, moving like a shadow, scanning every corner, every alley, every window. The streets between the northern warehouses and the industrial district were full of debris, abandoned vehicles, and the occasional corpse. The groans of the dead grew louder as we approached. Boone held up a hand, signaling us to stop. Ahead, a group of creatures was moving slowly through the street, dragging broken limbs, twitching unnaturally. Boone crouched low, motioning us to follow. "We go through the alley," he whispered. "Stay low, move fast, and don't make a sound. One mistake and they're on us." We crept along the side of the building, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. The creatures were close, but they didn't see us. I could feel the tension in Rick and Marcus, and I knew they were on the edge of panic. One wrong move, one noise, and it would be over. We made it past the group without incident, slipping into a narrow alley that led toward the industrial district. The city stretched ahead, broken and burning, a labyrinth of death. Boone turned to us, face grim but determined. "This is far from over. But we're alive. And as long as we're alive, we can fight." We moved through the alley, the city around us silent and waiting, full of shadows that moved with hunger. Every step was a calculated risk, every moment a test of survival. And in this world, surviving meant more than just hiding. It meant facing the dead, facing the chaos, and never stopping. The industrial district stretched before us like a graveyard of concrete and steel. Rusted warehouses lined the streets, some partially collapsed, others seemingly intact but abandoned for years. Smoke from distant fires hung in the air, thick and acrid, curling like ghostly fingers around broken rooftops. The city had been dead for a long time, but now the living and the dead moved among each other like prey and predator. Boone led the way, moving silently, his eyes scanning every alley, every doorway, every shadow. Rick and Marcus followed, tense and exhausted, each step a struggle against fear and fatigue. The streets between the northern warehouses and the heart of the industrial district were a labyrinth. Burned-out trucks blocked main roads, piles of rubble sealed alleys, and scattered debris made quiet movement nearly impossible. Boone's experience kept us alive. He knew which routes to take, which shadows could hide us, which buildings offered temporary cover. As we moved through a side street, Boone suddenly stopped, pressing a hand to his chest and lowering his voice. "Dead ahead. 3 of them, slow. We move along the wall, stick close, stay low." We flattened ourselves against a crumbling brick wall, hearts pounding. The 3 creatures shuffled along the street, dragging broken limbs, their moans low and guttural. Their skin was gray, peeling in patches, eyes milky and unseeing but somehow focused on the faintest movement. I gripped my pipe tighter, every muscle tense. Rick's hands shook as he clutched the bat, Marcus's face pale, eyes darting. Boone counted in his head. "Now." We moved, silent and deliberate, hugging the wall. One of the creatures lifted a hand, reaching blindly, but it didn't see us. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the air thick with fear. We passed, step by careful step, and finally slipped into a narrow alley that led deeper into the industrial zone. The alley opened into a courtyard surrounded by massive warehouses. Some buildings had collapsed roofs, others were boarded up but sturdy. Boone scanned the area carefully. "This one here," he said, pointing to a brick warehouse at the far end, "we can clear it and use it as a base. There's room inside, thick walls, and a second floor to watch the streets." We approached cautiously. The main doors were boarded, but Boone found a side entrance, partially rusted but workable. We slipped inside, hearts hammering. The warehouse smelled of dust, oil, and decay. Crates and pallets were stacked neatly along the walls. The floor was littered with debris, but it offered enough space for us to make a temporary living area. Boone moved quickly, inspecting the building. We barricade the doors, check for supplies, and set watch shifts. The dead will find us eventually, but for now, this is as safe as we're going to get. We spent the afternoon scavenging the warehouse. A few cans of food remained in a dusty storage room, along with bottled water and some old blankets. I found a small first aid kit, mostly empty, but enough to treat minor injuries. Boone suggested we set up a makeshift living area in the center of the warehouse, using crates and pallets as walls to separate our space from the rest of the building. Rick was still visibly shaken. This is insane," he muttered. "How can anyone survive this?" Boone didn't answer immediately. He scanned the room, eyes sharp. Finally, he said, "Survival isn't about understanding. It's about moving, watching, and staying alive. That's it. Every step, every choice, counts. Panic kills. Focus saves." Marcus nodded, gripping his bat tightly. "I've seen it," he said quietly. "People. They change. Not all of them. Not yet. But they do. You have to be ready." By evening, we had barricaded the doors with pallets, crates, and metal scraps. Boone suggested we take shifts watching the streets outside. I volunteered for the first watch. From a small window on the second floor, I could see the industrial streets stretching into the distance. Broken windows, collapsed roofs, abandoned vehicles. Somewhere out there, the dead moved. Hours passed in tense silence. Every sound, metal scraping, a distant groan, the wind rattling debris, made me flinch. I gripped my pipe tightly, eyes scanning, ears straining. Rick and Marcus slept in shifts, exhausted but safe for the moment. Boone remained vigilant, moving between the office area and the living quarters, listening, observing, always alert. Around midnight, a sudden noise made me freeze. A distant crash echoed through the district, followed by low, guttural moans. The dead were moving closer. I signaled Boone quietly,